The arrow doesn't find a king's eye. That detail, it turns out, is almost certainly a myth. What is absolutely certain is this. On the 14th of October, 1066, King Harold Godwinson fell on a hillside above Hastings. His army collapsed around him, and the England that had existed for 6 centuries, the England of mead halls and monasteries, of Old English verse and Saxon lore, died with him before the sun went down. A new world stepped through that wound. It spoke French. It built in stone. And it would eventually build an empire that touched every corner of the earth. This is the complete history of England, from the very first footprints pressed into post-glacial mud to the exhausted, transformed nation that emerged from the Second World War in 1945. Not a list of dates, not a parade of monarchs, a story, one of the most consequential stories in human history, told as it actually lived and breathed. Let us begin, as all English stories must, with the land itself. "13,000 years ago, as the last glaciers retreated northward and the ice released its grip on the island, human beings followed the thaw. They moved through dense forest, along river valleys, hunting red deer and wild boar across a landscape that still connected to continental Europe. The island we now call England did not yet exist as an island. That separation came around 6,000 years ago, when rising seas finally swallowed the land bridge and cut Britain loose from the European mainland. The people already here found themselves, for the first time, surrounded by water. Their descendants would spend the next several thousand years learning to use that fact to extraordinary advantage. By the time the Iron Age settled over Britain, roughly 800 BC onward, the island was home to Celtic tribes of formidable organization. They built hill forts on ridge lines, elaborate circular settlements with wooden palisades and interior streets. They traded extensively with Gaul and beyond. Their priests, the Druids, memorized vast libraries of oral knowledge over decades of training, presiding over rituals in sacred groves with a spiritual authority that bound communities together without a single written word. These were not savages. They were sophisticated societies operating entirely outside the literate world. And then, in 55 BC, something arrived that would change that permanently. Julius Caesar came twice to Britain, in 55 and 54 BC, more to probe and impress than to conquer. But 97 years later, Emperor Claudius sent 4 legions in earnest, and by 43 AD, Rome had claimed the southern half of the island. What followed was 4 centuries of transformation so deep it still marks the English landscape today. The Romans built Londinium, a trading post on the Thames that would become the most important city in northern Europe. They paved nearly 17,000 kilometers of road across Britain, so straight and so well drained that some of their lines are still followed by modern motorways. They built heated floors, public baths, amphitheaters and aqueducts. And here is a detail most people never consider. Roman Britain was ethnically diverse. Soldiers from North Africa, Syria and the Balkans garrisoned forts along Hadrian's Wall. The empire, in its Roman phase, was genuinely cosmopolitan. Then, in 410 AD, Emperor Honorius sent the British cities a letter that amounted to a gentle death sentence. "Defend yourselves," he told them. Rome had nothing left to give. The legions pulled out, and into the vacuum came wave after wave of Germanic migrants, Angles from southern Denmark, Saxons from northern Germany, Jutes from the Jutland Peninsula. They did not simply conquer. They settled, farmed, intermarried, and gradually, over a century or more, transformed the language, religion, and culture of the island. The old Brittonic speech retreated westward into Wales and Cornwall. In its place rose Old English, the direct ancestor of the language you are hearing right now. The kingdoms these settlers built, Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex, East Anglia, Kent, were distinct political entities, often at war, occasionally in alliance. And they were rich enough, by the late 8th century, to attract a new and terrifying kind of attention. In 793, Norse raiders descended on the monastery at Lindisfarne off the Northumbrian coast, looting its library, its silver, its sacred objects, and leaving the monks to scatter across the frozen shoreline. The Viking Age in England had begun. For the next 2 centuries, Norse warriors, and eventually Norse settlers, reshaped the map of northern and eastern England. Place names ending in by and Thorpe across Yorkshire and Lincolnshire are their fingerprints, still visible more than 1,000 years later. Into this chaotic century stepped Alfred of Wessex, the only English monarch ever given the title Great, and perhaps the only one who genuinely earned it. By 878, the Danes had overrun almost every English kingdom. Alfred fled into the Somerset marshes with a handful of men, regrouped, and at the Battle of Edington decisively reversed the tide. He then negotiated a partition of England, the Danelaw in the north and east, his own Wessex in the south, and proceeded to rebuild his kingdom from the ground up. He established fortified towns called burhs, created a navy, commissioned the translation of Latin texts into English, and founded what became the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. Alfred was not merely a warrior king. He was an architect of civilization. His grandson Ethelstan became, in 927, the first ruler to be recognized as King of England, a single unified country forged from centuries of fragmentation. That unity was fragile, and it faltered. By 1017, a Danish king, Knut, sat on the English throne, ruling, with genuine competence, an empire that stretched from England to Norway. Then came Edward the Confessor, more monk than monarch, who died childless in January 1066, and left 3 men convinced the throne was rightfully theirs. We know what happened next, on that October hillside above the sea. William of Normandy's conquest was not merely military, it was civilizational. He replaced the entire Anglo-Saxon landholding class with his Norman barons almost overnight. He ordered the Domesday Book, a survey of land ownership so comprehensive it covered nearly every village and farm in England. Completed by 1086, just 20 years after his arrival. Castle building erupted across the landscape. Stone keeps rising above town after town as permanent, unmistakable statements of authority. And the English language itself was fractured. For 2 centuries, the nobility spoke Norman French, the church wrote in Latin, and the common people continued speaking Old English in their fields and markets, until those 3 streams gradually merged into something new: Middle English, the language of Geoffrey Chaucer. The medieval centuries that followed were dense with drama. The Magna Carta, signed under duress by King John in 1215, established, shakily, impermanently, but definitively, that even a king was subject to the law. The Black Death arrived in 1348, carrying off perhaps 1/3 of England's population in 2 years of unimaginable loss, and inadvertently empowering the survivors who remained to demand higher wages and greater freedom. The 100 Years' War against France produced Henry V and the improbable triumph at Agincourt, and also produced Joan of Arc, who reversed it. The Wars of the Roses tore the English nobility apart through decades of dynastic conflict and ended in 1485 when a Welsh nobleman named Henry Tudor took the crown at Bosworth Field and founded a dynasty that would preside over one of history's most extraordinary reinventions. Under the Tudors, England broke from Rome. Henry VIII's desire for a new wife became the occasion for a religious revolution. The Church of England, with the monarch as its head, was established in the 1530s, and the monasteries that had anchored English life for 500 years were dissolved, their wealth seized, their libraries scattered to the winds. His daughter Elizabeth I steadied the ship. During her 45-year reign, English theatre reached its greatest heights in Shakespeare. English exploration reached Virginia and the Caribbean. And in 1588, an English fleet scattered the Spanish Armada in the Channel, announcing to a watching world that this small island intended to compete for mastery of the seas. It won. The 17th century brought civil war, the execution of a king, a republic, a restoration, and a financial revolution that created the Bank of England in 1694, providing the capital engine that would power everything that followed. The 18th century brought the Industrial Revolution, not in London, but in the Midlands and the North, where watermills and then steam engines transformed cotton, iron and coal into the sinews of a new world economy. Manchester and Birmingham grew from market towns into industrial cities of staggering scale. By 1850, more than half of England's population lived in cities, the first time that had ever been true of any nation on earth. And the Empire. By its Victorian peak, the British Empire covered roughly a quarter of the world's land surface, governing roughly 400 million people. It built railways across India, administered courts in West Africa, planted settlers in Australia and Canada and New Zealand, and fought wars on nearly every continent. It was an enterprise of extraordinary complexity. Simultaneously, the most advanced trading economy the world had yet seen, and a system built on coercion, extraction, and the suppression of subject peoples who had never consented to be governed. Both things were true. The British carried engineering and law and medicine around the globe. They also carried chains. By 1945, 2 world wars had hollowed out the treasury, redrawn the map of the world, and set in motion the end of empire. British soldiers who had served in Burma and North Africa returned home to bombed cities and rationed food. And in July 1945, they voted, in a landslide, for a welfare state and a national health service. The age of conquest was ending. The age of reinvention was beginning. From a jawbone found in a Devon cave to a nation rebuilding itself from rubble, England's story has never once stopped moving. If that kind of history, full, honest, and cinematic, is what you came here for, then you are exactly where you belong. Subscribe to History Recreated. Leave a comment telling us which chapter of this story you want to see explored next, and we will take you there, century by century, stone by stone, word by word.